Benefactor underwriting for this broadcast has been provided by a grant from Republic Bank. The power of red is back. Major underwriting support for this broadcast has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Customers Bank, Collins Building Services, Marks Paneth. Additional underwriting support has been provided by grants from AmTrust Title, Bank of America, Capital One Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Ocean First Bank, RPW Group, TD Bank, the One Stop Property Group, and these friends. "2022, hopefully a great year, hopefully a recovery, hopefully nice things are going to happen. No more Omicron, no more COVID. Maybe I'm dreaming, but hopefully things are looking good." Things were looking good in the fourth quarter leasing, according to some reports I noticed, including a report from Colliers International. So what's really happening in the office market? What changes? How many people are coming to the office? Are people signing leases? I don't have that answer. So instead, I've assembled this group of business leaders to provide their insight on the office market in New York City. My guests today include Michael Cohn, who is the president of the Tri-State region for Colliers International, Ken Fisher, who is a partner at Fisher Brothers, and last but not least, Michael Giglio, part of the threesome of the Michaels over here, who is the chief financial officer and a principal at the Kaufman Organization. So, Mr. Cohn, you did something with Signature Bank recently, a major deal, right? Tell me about that.
Well, that's true. Signature is a great regional bank whose stock has been going through the roof, and they're on an expansion tear. And it's pandemic be damned. The organization has to house its people, and it just more than doubled its presence in the area just south of Times Square over on Broadway with Empire State Realty Trust. Took another 170,000 square feet.
So here's the question: Are you going to the turf of Michael Giglio? Because the Kaufman Organization, they own a lot of property in the area called the Garment Center.
So the strip of Broadway from 42nd Street south to about 34th Street has been going through a metamorphosis that started long before the pandemic. And while Empire State Realty Trust has several holdings there, there are a number of landlords who are exploiting the changes in that neighborhood. And the Garment Center is really working its way westward over to 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue and the side streets. And the buildings along Broadway, many of which are magnificent, either examples of Art Deco or in some cases even steel and glass, are attracting the traditional office tenant that wants to be in a location that's actually convenient to both Penn Station and Grand Central, near Bryant Park, which has become a hot neighborhood, and is a relative bargain compared to other parts of Midtown.
Michael, you're the financial guy, and you're right over there at 450 7th Avenue. So how does the Kaufman Organization see the market, especially in the perceived garment center, as we would call it?
I think there's a challenge in terms of what the area has around it, in terms of the leftovers of what's happened with this pandemic and some of the things going on with some of the homeless people. And there have been certain things that have taken away from the desire of people to come to the area. So we're doing everything that we can to minimize that and to rectify it. But we also need, you know, the help of the city, and we need the new mayor to do certain things that he promised that he might do. And over time, nothing is going to be a panacea that's going to take place in short order. Michael Cohen and Stephen Kaufman are very active with the area in terms of its ability to feel safe for people. So in terms of the marketplace, I don't really speak to the marketplace as anyone who could predict the future, but I can tell you from, you know, history as the reporting officer that things are on the trend upward again. And I think that we're out of the worst of what we could anticipate. So for us, we're looking at, you know, collecting 95% of our rents on a regular basis, whereas there were points in the beginning of this pandemic when we were looking at 60%. You know, some of the numbers that are being reported in terms of people coming to buildings are in the area running from a year ago at 12% to 38% now. It's very difficult to bring an office back to 100% occupancy because, especially now with this variant, we're seeing people who have contracted the variant who were triple vaccinated, and they're part of our work staff. So we're working around that. Now, we also have to provide a safe environment for our tenants. And our institutional partners have a tendency to want us to do business in a certain way with respect to protecting tenants. So we put our best foot forward. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think any of us do, but we always have to ask that question: what will it become? Will people return to the office on a modified basis? And the answer to that, I think, is yes. To what degree, I can't predict.
As I stated at the beginning, the fourth quarter leasing was up, and some of the leasing is also up in the first quarter. And I believe it was recently noted in the press, Ken, that Morgan Stanley is taking additional space in Park Avenue Tower. And Park Avenue Tower has had significant leasing during 2021. Let's talk about Park Avenue Tower. Let's talk about the leasing at 299 Park Avenue, and we'll talk about 1345.
Yeah, well, we were fortunate enough to close the Morgan Stanley deal before the end of the year, which was great. Obviously, it was about 330,000 square feet of expansion. It's kind of indicative of what's going on with the financial market, the financial space, which has been expanding. And while it sounds terrible to say, we actually didn't have a bad year. We actually had a pretty decent year. Fisher Brothers signed almost 800,000 square feet of leases in 2021. So between Park Avenue Plaza and Morgan Stanley, we did Jennison Partners, which was another great deal, which was almost 100,000 square feet. 299, we're up about 100,000 square feet of leases done. So we continue. And what it does is it validates the kind of decision that we made a couple of years ago because of all the new construction that was going on, which we haven't seen in decades in terms of the number of square footage being put on the market. We decided that we needed to update our portfolio. And so we did, to the tune of about $150 million. And all of these leases that we did kind of validated that, kind of validated the decision that we made. And obviously it paid off in the form of the kind of leasing that we did. Since July, we actually did 18 deals.
Michael Cohen, question on, in addition to your responsibility at Colliers, you and your family own a couple of other properties. How are your buildings doing in the downtown and midtown South and around the city?
So similar to what Michael Giglio mentioned earlier, there was a real struggle at the beginning of the pandemic with tenants unable to pay their rents and struggling for survival. And we had to examine so many requests for aid and assistance. The landlords of those neighborhoods became really like the lenders of last resort. Fortunately, we are past that epoch now, and tenants seem to be thriving again, paying the rent. we're left with some holes. And the same principle that Ken just applied to his Midtown portfolio applies south of 34th Street also. You have to reinvest in the buildings. You have to make them competitive and attractive, and look at different strategies to keep them full. And in addition, we also have to spend more money on tenant fit outs. The tenant of today expects the landlord to either build the space before they come or build it for them when they arrive. And so the concept of a turnkey, which didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago, is now prevalent throughout Midtown South. We as landlords are looking at our vacant spaces and we're saying, okay, there are only so many different ways this space of 5 or 10 or even 20,000 square feet is going to be laid out. Let's take our best stab and build it and find somebody who wants that immediacy of occupancy. Or we're saying to the tenant, here it is, it's beautiful and it's open. Tell us where to put the walls. We'll have it up and running for you in 90 days. And that's really the strategy in Midtown South.
Let's talk about amenities. I noticed that Fisher Brothers created Ease Hospitality. Explain to me and my audience what Ease Hospitality is, Ken.
Well, Ease Hospitality is our management vehicle. We decided, you know, in tune with the amount of work that we did, to create an amenity center. We were very careful about it. We actually polled our tenants to see what they would like. We didn't want to build just for the sake of building. So what we did was we created a beautiful amenity, about 15,000 square feet, called At Ease. And at Ease is the actual vehicle in which we are using to manage all of these amenity spaces. So we actually have 2 now. We have 1345 and we have one at 605 3rd Avenue. It's approximately 20,000 square feet. What we've done is we put heavy emphasis on conferencing in case business travel, you know, does suffer and people don't want to travel. They don't want to leave home. They don't want to go on airplanes to the tune that they don't for anything other than pleasure. And so we decided to build emphasis on the conferencing. So at 1345, we have 8,000 square feet of conferencing, and the same thing at 605. So Ease is a wonderful company that my daughter, Crystal, is actually running now. And we continue to improve it. We continue to update it. And we'll continue to, you know, try and keep up with the times.
Well, with regard to that, let's talk about the WeWork and the co-working spaces and your thoughts of what's going to happen in 2022 and in the future. Michael Giglio?
You know, with respect to safety and the WeWork and the co-working spaces, I don't know whether or not you can enforce the same types of things that you can enforce in a private company with regard to making people feel that they're safe, from masks to protocol and things of that nature. So I really don't see much more attraction to them as there has been in the past. I don't expect that to continue. If I were a betting man, I would say I don't think it will continue.
Michael Cohen?
So I think you need to distinguish in the co-working sector between the various different types of alternatives out there. There are those that cater to large enterprises, giving them their own confined space, but furnished and wired, and for just a year or two. There are those that are office suite companies catering to folks looking for 1s and 2s in terms of offices and number of employees. And then there's everything in between. The idea of a large floor with unrelated parties sitting cheek by jowl at desks and sharing a beer together, I think that paradigm is maybe gone for a long time, if not forever, and we're not going to see those. But there's a lot of money flooding into the suites business and the co-working business, trying to crack the code for the 21st century and come up with a model that will endure the pandemic and cater to those folks who don't want to sign, you know, longer term leases and don't have the capital to invest in their own infrastructure.
So here's a question. I think it was a couple of years ago, Michael, you were on the show with me, and we were talking about the Midtown rezoning. And, you know, One Vanderbilt has been highly successful. And we right now have a couple of new spec buildings. You know, you have JP Morgan, which is not spec because they're going to use the building themselves. Then there's the Rudin building at 415 Madison. And then there's the Boston Properties building. And then there's, you know, the Grand Hyatt site over there. So it's a question for all of you. Can the city absorb this type of space, omitting the JP Morgan because that's a tenant over there? And what's going to happen to the JP Morgan? Are they going to stay in their property over there that they currently have? Ken Fisher or Michael Giglio or Michael Cohen on this topic?
There's no question that new product has been a market driver. Hudson Yards did very well. We've seen other new developments do very well. I think that there is demand for new space, but also remember, it's a great time to be a tenant because, you know, New York demands, you know, the best updated infrastructure and so forth. So even though there's new construction and our portfolio is older, dare I say it, we have undertaken a massive infrastructure program. So there's very little I can't do to our portfolio except change the floor plates. So, you know, that's the reason that we undertook this massive kind of repositioning of our portfolio, was to be able to compete with new construction. So, you know, tenants today, they have choices. They can go new, or if they want to go into what I call more seasoned buildings, you know, we have building management systems. We have, it's backed up by a fiber backbone. We have all of the bells and whistles. And at the same time, we're committed towards a green kind of a direction in keeping with the city mandates and so forth. We've got the highest possible wellness standards. And, you know, after the pandemic, we didn't wait for the CDC. We actually had started some projects earlier than the pandemic, such as our HVAC system. So very little that we can't do to our portfolio to be able to compete with some of the newer stuff. But yeah, I think it will, the new stuff comes online, I think the market will absorb.
So I would agree. I would say that One Vanderbilt has proven out the hypothesis that a brand new building of 21st century standards can succeed in Midtown Manhattan. But I also think that Ken's portfolio, for example, has proven that well-maintained 20th century properties that are well located and of a similar kind of trophy or Class A category can also thrive. And frankly, in some cases, offer tremendous value when you look at the rents that are being asked by the brand new buildings. So there's space in Midtown for both the brand new and the like new. And I think that the developers controlling the various sites you listed are going to be cautious about finding their anchor tenant and going into the ground with some assurance that they're off to a running start. I don't think we're going to see, like we did in the 1980s, steel rising on spec buildings all over town. So I think if you combine the attractiveness of the product with the cautiousness of the development community, I think you'll see a number of very successful new buildings in Midtown.
I agree.
What about the far west side? I mean, besides Hudson Yards.
So the far west side is creating its own kind of ecosystem of laboratory space, automotive. I'm not sure, and some creative space as well. But I'm not sure that we're going to see, I may end up eating these words, Hudson Yards extend up, you know, 11th Avenue into Midtown. Especially now that Midtown is rezoned and we're going to see brand new construction in the core of Midtown, which I think is still where not most maybe, but many tenants want to be, back by the transportation hubs in Midtown.
So Michael Giglio, a couple of months ago, Steve Kaufman was quoted that you have old buildings, okay? And these are old buildings and they can do a limited amount. What are you planning to do to attract people to these older buildings, which Michael Cohen also owns older buildings, to get the tenants to meet the obligations of the investments that you've made with your financial partners?
So I think, first I want to say I agree with Michael and Ken on both of their takes with regard to where we go on this. And with respect to what you're saying, as Steve said, we have old buildings. Yeah, we have old buildings, but as the case is with the Madison Square portfolio, we've taken Ken's approach, which was early on when we took Madison Square over. We put those 5 buildings together that were in a state of disrepair. Actually, there were 4 at the time. And we basically redeveloped the core and the infrastructure of those buildings, new elevators, new lobbies, new electrical systems, new plumbing systems, new built out spaces, pre-built that were attractive to, people who didn't necessarily know what they wanted to do, but like the light and the open air. So we have been, and our main sales pitch has been to our institutional partners, that we were going to take these 100-year-old buildings that we knew how to run. The reality is you can transform anything into something that might work for the purpose of having to pivot in this market. And the other thing that we were also looking at is, air monitoring systems and HVAC systems that, seem to have a better type of environment for people to be able to co-work in. And we would just look to make those buildings more like, and they'll never be like the new construction, because you can do so many things with new construction, but you do everything that you can with the older buildings that you said Steve was quoted on. Everything that you can. And our institutional partners like that plan, like our thesis on where we go when we take over a property. And, we looked at another building, which was 135 West 29th Street, which is a beehive full of tenants, if you will. And that's been one of the best performing collection buildings in our portfolio over the course of the pandemic. They were smaller tenants, there were less money to outlay. So we were with, the incubator type guys, which is where, certain smaller guys might not be able to go to a One Vanderbilt, right? Obviously, One Vanderbilt is commanding more rents than they actually thought that they would get when they underwrote that deal. So I don't think you'll see as much demand for the older buildings that are not cared for and not transformed with newer state-of-the-art systems. I think that you need to create that niche yourself in redeveloping your properties.
Since the topic of our discussion was the office market in New York City, what's your thoughts, Michael, since you take care of the tri-state region for Colliers, what's your thoughts about the office market in Brooklyn?
Well, Brooklyn is a market that I think was originally conceived, if you think back to the days of Metrotech, as the competition for the Jersey waterfront. And I don't think it ever successfully became that kind of product, Metro Center aside. So what has happened is that instead, Brooklyn has evolved into its own ecosystem, particularly with the migration of millennials into Brooklyn. I have a 23-year-old daughter who, wouldn't be caught dead on the island of Manhattan. She lives in Brooklyn. And so many of her contemporaries are there. And if the workforce is there, then the employers want to be there. So the envisioned paradigm that Brooklyn would attract the major companies that were looking to move people out of Manhattan, their back offices, onto the Jersey waterfront, that never happened, and I don't think it ever will. Instead, it's become the home to an indigenous group of businesses who are looking to cater to the Brooklyn-based workforce, and in some cases, in many cases, the Brooklyn-based proprietors. And yes, every now and then, there is a tenant that moves, votes with its feet and moves out of Manhattan into Brooklyn, and there will always be a steady trickle. But I think Brooklyn is its own headquarters town and its own ecosystem, and attractive not as an alternative to Manhattan, but as a market unto itself.
So with less than a minute, I just want one comment. What's your thoughts about conversion of office buildings into residential, which took place in in the 90s, in lower Manhattan because of tax incentives. Ken, your thought? Michael, and then Michael Giulio.
Well, I think I think that trend, is interesting. It doesn't apply to our portfolio. It's just not efficient and cost effective for us. But I think that, given the right circumstance, I think it's a valid alternative, to having an empty office building.
I think it's a heavy lift. I agree with Ken, and it's not something that we could automatically just, with a sweep of a pen to write a check, provide all these capital improvement programs that'll take these things from office to residential. I don't think it's a reality. However, I think that if some of the lower end of the market of buildings of our ilk are sitting vacant, I think, as Ken states, that might be an only alternative for owners to convert those into income producing assets.
So I'd like to say, I think my crystal apple is looking a little brighter. Let's hopefully get rid of Omicron, some of the COVID, and continue what happened in the fourth quarter. It's been a good pace, and I'm certain with great landlords, operators, New York City will survive. And I'd like to thank Michael, Ken, and Michael, and I'll see you next week.